for replay purposes. Welcome to Generic Imatinib, Gaining Perspective. Please remember that information provided in this web seminar is not intended as a substitute for your physician's guidance and care. My name is Sarah Rothschild, the Allergy Program Director, and I am your moderator today. As most of you know, on February 1st, the commercial launch of the generic imatinib came to market in the United States. In response to this announcement, we have invited a panel of experts to provide an update on the questions and concerns the patient community has about this transition. To provide a balanced viewpoint, the Allergy invited Novartis and Sun Pharmaceuticals to participate in this webinar. Unfortunately, Sun declined to participate at this time. Before we start our introductions, we want to welcome the CML community who is also participating in this seminar today. We want to especially thank the National CML Society for spreading the word about this event and for collaborating with us on helping to inform and educate the patient community. At this time, I would like to introduce our panelists today. First, Michelle Durborow is the Allergy Patient Registry Director. She holds a degree and training in both clinical and industrial pharmacy, as well as background in histopathology as a clinical laboratory technologist focused on cancer diagnosis. Next, Dr. Jonathan Trent is the co-director of the Musculoskeletal Center, director of the Sarcoma Medical Research Program, and professor of medicine at the University of Miami Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center. His clinical interests focus on GIST patient care, clinical trials, and translational research. Dr. Trent is board certified in internal medicine and medical oncology. Melissa Simpson is a senior program manager in the Center for Benefits Access at the National Council on Aging. She delivers training and technical assistance to state aging organizations related to Medicare and other policy questions. Melissa has extensive experience working with Medicare beneficiaries as the State Health Insurance Assistance Program Director in Arkansas, where she led education, outreach, and enrollment of people with Medicare into public benefits that make Medicare affordable. I want to thank the panel for joining us today, and thank you all for joining and listening into this informative discussion. I would like to now turn it over to Michelle.
Hello, everyone. I would like to start this presentation. Before we start, we would like to have everyone's perspective to help us in this poll that we invite everyone to please answer the question. For the participants in this webinar, would you switch from a brand to a generic? We will tally the poll at the end of the presentation. Thank you so much for participating in this webinar. I would like to start the presentation with some key terms so we can better understand how generic drugs or any other terms are used in the market today. A generic drug is a product that is comparable to the innovator drug product in dosage, routes of administration, and efficacy. It usually enters the market after the patent expiration or the exclusivity of the innovator drug. A copy drug is a drug provided by a third-party manufacturer despite the drug is still patented. A substandard drug is a genuine product but does not meet quality specifications, which may lead to lack of efficacy. A counterfeit drug is deliberately fraudulent and mislabeled product which may or may not have the ingredients that are needed. So just to give you a perspective of when and how do generics come into play, the innovator drug usually stays on exclusivity due to the patent for about 20 to 25 years, depending on the country where it's being marketed. And so about on the 20th year, that would be the start of the generics applying for market authorization. The drug development process and approval of an innovator drug usually has several steps to it, from a preclinical, clinical. I'm sure you're aware of the clinical. These are the phase 1, 2, and 3 studies for the drug. And then the approval for market authorization, to whatever country it will be launched, and then the post-marketing studies, or the phase 4 studies. The generic approval process, however, is abbreviated since the innovator drug have already proven the preclinical and clinical aspect of the active ingredient. In the next slide, I will discuss what generics are required to have to obtain market authorization. In a tightly regulated market like the European Union or the United States through the FDA, generic drugs are required to have the same active ingredient, amount of active ingredient, and purity, same pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic properties, stability, mechanism of action, safety and efficacy, therapeutic indication, and route of administration. What is allowed are they can have a different salt, different excipients, different shape, size, scoring, product expiration, manufacturing process, product name, and packaging. If any of these are significantly different from the innovator drug, then the generic manufacturer should submit further proof of efficacy and safety. Just to break it down as to what process and what standards both the brand name and the generic drugs are required to meet federal standards for good manufacturing process to demonstrate therapeutic efficacy. Generics, unlike the brand name drugs, are only required to prove bioequivalence. Bioequivalence will be discussed in the next slides. Bioavailability is the fraction or amount of administered drug that reaches the systemic circulation. For example, if a patient is taking 100 milligram drug orally and 70 milligram of the drug is absorbed unchanged in the system, the bioavailability is then considered to be 70%. So what affects bioavailability? From the dosage form, the nature of the drug formulation can affect this. These are the particle size, salt form, crystal polymorphism, or presence of excipients. It can influence the ease of dissolution and therefore alter the rate of absorption, chemical instability, solubility of the drug, and first-pass hepatic metabolism. If this means that if the drug is rapidly metabolized by the liver, the amount of unchanged drug that gains access to the systemic circulation is decreased. Other factors that affect bioavailability could be on the patient's idiosyncrasy side, and these are meals and timing, age, gender, disease, genetic traits, GI physiology, and others, not limited to this list, of course. Bioequivalence is defined as when two related drugs show comparable bioavailability and similar times to achieve peak blood concentration, they are said to be bioequivalent. Bioequivalence assesses whether the drug that gets into the system achieves a level where it will exert efficacy without toxicity. How is bioequivalence assessed? It is a study that is conducted in a small number of healthy adult subjects representative of the general population. The study numbers that you see below are arbitrary. The bioequivalence study that the current generic manufacturer submitted to the FDA had about 42 CML patients. To understand how bioequivalence studies are used in determining the therapeutic equivalence of the generic drug, it should show that the active ingredients in the patient's bloodstream is the same in generic and innovator product. As you can see in the graph, if two products are compared side by side, they should have the same Cmax and Tmax. Cmax is the maximum amount of drug concentration that reaches the plasma, and the Tmax is the time that is required for the drug to reach that concentration. The criteria for acceptance is 90. The generic drug should prove a 90% confidence interval of the ratios of the AUC, Cmax, and Tmax, which should fall between 80 to 125%. The generic that is currently now in the market, in their bioequivalence study, they proved 94 to 104%. In the eyes of the FDA, the equivalence of generics, the regulatory assumption is that if the drug is pharmaceutically equivalent, everything was made the same, and it proved the bioequivalence, and therefore it is therapeutically equivalent. So I will not go a lot into the generic guidelines. For patients who need to see the rest of this guideline, you can go to our website. We have them posted at the LifeRap Group generics webpage. And lastly, we have our programs and support at the LifeRap Group. We have dedicated, as I've mentioned, a web page in our website, which you can get some answers for the questions that you may have. We also have information on patient assistance programs and other resources about generics and studies. We also have a generic TKI list. This is a global list of available generic versions of any tyrosine kinase inhibitors. The generic research program, we've also launched this research program to determine the Imatinib blood levels of the difference between the generic and the Imatinib. So, the generic Imatinib and the branded Imatinib. So we can learn from this research how they differ and how they affect patients, both the CML and the GIST patients. We also have the LRG patient registry. This is an ongoing surveillance of treatments and evaluations of GIST patients. The data is gathered from around the world, and we hope that this will address the concern of GIST patients today. Thank you so much, and please remember that the most expensive drug is the one that does not work.
Thank you very much, Michelle. That was very informative. I'd like to now hand this over to Dr. Trent. You can get started.
Yeah, thank you for the kind introduction, Sarah. And I would like to welcome everybody to today's program. My name is John Trent, and I'm a sarcoma medical oncologist at the University of Miami Sylvester Comprehensive Cancer Center, where we have both very large GI stromal tumor and CML population of patients. And so we are spending a lot of time on this topic recently, and I will be discussing some of the reason that we're having this discussion, and I'd be happy at the end to answer any questions during the question and answer session. So cancer treatment has really come a long way. Since the initiation of the Cancer Act, the National Cancer Institute was formed, given autonomy from the NIH, and given substantial funding as a war on cancer. This act it really established the ability of the research community to develop an understanding of the biology of cancer. And this has been going on for more than 40 years now. And the payoff is that we, as a cancer community, are really developing a substantial understanding of some, if not many, of the drivers of cancer. And this has made a very, very large impact on patient care. As you know, as those of you who know who have been affected or family members affected by GI stromal tumor, this disease, when it presented in the metastatic setting, was equivalent to metastatic pancreas cancer. Survival was in the time frame of months, perhaps 9 months. And then with the development and understanding of mutations in genes such as KIT and the development of medications to target those mutations such as Imatinib, has dramatically changed patients' lives, with median and some recent studies survival in the time frame of 7 years. Many patients in my clinic have been alive with metastatic GIST for 14 years or longer. And so this has really paid off. And you know, that funding and research has really, as I mentioned, made a big impact on patients' lives. And this just shows, if you look at red, shows the incidence of childhood cancers going up over the last 40 years. And the blue line shows the incidence of deaths from cancer going down. In fact, now, as of today, 10-year survival is in the range of 75% for children with cancer. Similarly, cancer death rates in men have dropped 21% and women 12%. We clearly still have a lot of work to do, but patients are now living longer with cancer with many of these new oral medications and new medications that are biologically driven that have come out of research in our research laboratories. But that's also led to an increase in costs of taking care of cancer patients. The overall costs have risen substantially in the U.S., and in some studies perhaps even tripled in the last 20 to 30 years. So patients are living longer, but there has been some financial cost. And you can see on this slide that year after year, from back as far back as 1990, that the cost of taking care of patients has increased. And that's, you know, parallel to the cost of the discoveries we've made that have been made in cancer, in GIST, and other sarcomas. And you know, this cost is very complicated, and there are a lot of factors involved. It's not, you know, it's the cost in the hospital, it's the cost of antibiotics, it's the cost of nausea medicine that's very effective, it's the cost of the office visit to see the physician, it's the cost of the lab tests, it's the cost of the CT scan quality, MRI, PET scan. You know, those are all costly to make. It costs money to make them better. So we're living in a better and healthier world, but it's also more expensive. So one of the costs that we're discussing today is medication. So why are costs of medications expensive? Well, one of the reasons is it costs a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of manpower, a lot of brain work and ideas, and a lot of money to bring a drug into clinic to make an impact on patients' lives. And so for instance, one drug like Imatinib, to get that FDA approved, literally thousands and thousands of compounds had to be screened. Like if you look to the far left of this slide, a potential example would be 10,000 compounds are screened through drug discovery, high throughput drug discovery process. And some assays screen 30,000 compounds, and the result may be several hundred medications that again have to be screened out, and you may end up with a smaller number of patients of samples that are brought into clinical trial. For instance, in this example, 5 agents are brought into clinical trial. In the clinical trial process, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 requires a lot of individuals and a lot of research dollars to study those individuals to determine whether a medication works. And of those thousands and thousands of medicines that go through this process, they may lead to one drug approved in a period of 10 to 15 years. So it takes a lot of time as well. And this is data from a publication several years ago, but it shows you how much it costs to develop a new drug. So this is the expenditure to develop a drug in millions of dollars. In 1975, 1987, and 2000, it's estimated today to be over $1 billion to go through that process of screening, of clinical trials, of drug approval. So it's a long process, and it's an expensive process to bring one drug into clinic to make an impact on patients' lives. So with the cost of medicine increasing, we also have to be cognizant that GIST patients are often treated with imatinib for many, many years. Like I mentioned, some patients with metastatic GIST are alive and doing well and leading productive lives, high-quality lives for 14, 15 years. And that does raise some concerns because of the cost. 14 years of an expensive drug is a lot of money. And there's also, beyond just the fact that it's a lot of money, is the fact that there is some evidence that high-cost medication may lead to discontinuation and could lead to non-adherence. Now, this has not been published or shown to be a fact in GI stromal patients treated with imatinib, so it's somewhat of a theoretical concern, but this is a concern that has been raised. Lots of, the government and other individuals have proposed ways to control costs, such as universal health care coverage. Medicare maybe should, have proposed that Medicare cover all drug costs. They do often with IV medications. And the medication coverage for oral therapies is much less with Medicare than with than with the IV medications. Perhaps we should develop biomarker-based treatment decisions so that we have a higher, if we have an expensive medication, let's make sure we're treating the patients that medication is targeting. Still a problem in the U.S. today in designing trials appropriately to get medications approved for those patients who are likely to benefit. And then certainly there's market-based alternatives that individuals have proposed, and I just listed some of those here. And one, of course, at the bottom is using quality generics. And I'd just like to just make sure we're on the same page. And I know that this was mentioned already, but a generic drug is a pharmaceutical product intended to be interchangeable with the innovator, which is the original medication, and is manufactured without a license from the innovator company and marketed after the expiration date of the patent or the exclusive rights as defined by the World Health Organization. Now, as was mentioned by the previous presenter, we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We're talking about generics. We're not talking about counterfeit medicines, which are fraudulent, or substandard medicines, which have been, are not in the same use, did not meet quality or safety requirements. Generic drugs in the U.S. are used. They're used around the world. But there's challenges. There's challenges and topics for us to discuss. One is lowering the price of TKIs such as Imatinib. This investigator proposed that lower price TKIs could improve treatment penetration across the marketplace. It could increase adherence to therapy. It could expand the GIST population who live longer and continue on TKI. Many of our GIST patients, we tell them in clinic to consider with metastatic GIST being on Imatinib indefinitely. So generics, probably will lead to some cost savings, but there's also the huge question, and this question remains today: what is the efficacy, safety, and quality of generics? That's an unknown in many, many, many cases, especially with Imatinib and its use in GIST. And so here's two publications on the use of generic Imatinib in CML. This is in the same journal, Leukemia and Lymphoma. One publication came to the conclusion that the efficacy of the generic formulation was identical to the innovator medication Gleevec. The second publication in the same journal came to the conclusion that the non-branded versions of Imatinib, in other words generic, were inferior when treating patients with CML. We don't have this data with Gleevec and generic Imatinib, but this really underscores the unknown out there. So in summary, based on our available data, what we know, there's really a lack of appropriate high-quality randomized trials comparing generics and these innovator or originator medicines such as Gleevec. The generic products may not have uniform manufacturing process. They may come from multiple manufacturers. We really don't today cannot have 100% confidence in the efficacy and safety of generics with the lack of data. We're reassured that the FDA has done bioequivalency testing and that the generic Imatinib is chemically bioequivalent and should have the same efficacy and should have the same safety. But we just don't have the data to have 100% certainty. So we're left with a little bit of data and little data. And so that's kind of the information that's out there from in GIST with Imatinib, some with CML. But there's just still a lot of unknown in the GIST world with Imatinib. So I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to thank you for your attention. And at I said, at the question and answer session, I'll be happy to answer any. And I'd also like to just let everybody know at our GIST Day of Learning on April 3rd here in Miami, we'll be having much more detailed and in-depth discussion of generic medications for GIST patients. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trent. That was a great presentation. I would like to now turn it over to Melissa Simpson. You can begin.
Oh, great. Thanks, Sarah. It looks like I've lost my network connection, so I might need help advancing slides. The agenda slide, the second slide, just wanted to briefly share with you guys what I'm going to cover today. I'm going to talk about Medicare Part D drug coverage, how to figure your costs when the generic is available this summer, and where you can go to get unbiased and free help if you need it. On the next slide, I just wanted to highlight the fact that NCOA is celebrating its 65th birthday this year, and our mission is to work to improve the lives of millions of older adults, particularly those that are struggling. On the next slide, I just wanted to remind you that there are 4 different parts of Medicare. Today's focus is on Medicare Part D. Remember that Part D plans are sold by private insurance companies that have a contract with Medicare. And keep in mind that if you've got a Medicare Advantage plan, also known as a Medicare Part C plan, then the Part D rules I'm going to talk about today apply to you as well. On the next slide, we've got a list of what drives the out-of-pocket costs related to Medicare. And Sarah, I'm back in, so I should be able to advance now. Thank you. So all of these things, all these factors can impact what you have to pay and whether you can get your medication. The premium, the deductible, the cost of the drug, what tier it's on, what pharmacy you use, and whether there are restrictions or utilization management tools. So actually, I don't think I can advance. Can you go to the next slide, please? So this is the design of a standard Part D drug plan in 2016 in this infographic. It shows that there's a maximum allowed deductible of $360. Once you pay that, then you enter what's called the initial coverage level, and you pay a 25% cost of the drug until you reach the donut hole. Actually, can we go back one slide? That's where the gentleman is kind of falling off at the warning side into the hole. So getting to the donut hole counts what you pay plus what your plan pays, which we call the full cost of the drug. Once you're in the donut hole, what your plan pays stops counting. Now what counts is what you pay out of pocket plus a 50% discount that you get on brand name drugs. So you pay until that reaches $7,062.50. And then you hop out of the donut hole and you enter what's known as catastrophic coverage, where you pay 5% of the cost of your drug, your plan pays $15, and Medicare pays the other $80. So if these levels and numbers aren't making a whole lot of sense, don't worry too much. I'm going to show you a tool that you can use that will make these calculations for you. So on the slide that's titled Tiers Impact Out-of-Pocket Costs, where your plan places this drug is going to impact what you see. You can see that the tiers, the lower the tier, the lower your cost is going to be. In the example that I'm going to share, I used Gleevec, which is on a specialty tier, and it's likely that because of the cost, the generic form will be placed on the specialty tier as well. On the next slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit about pharmacies. So which pharmacy you use can impact your cost as well. Typically, the lower price comes from an in-network preferred cost-sharing pharmacy. These tend to be those bigger box retailers because they have a greater purchasing and negotiating power than typically your local independent pharmacy. So I'm not saying here that you should pick one over the other. I just want you to know that there is a difference based on pharmacy at times. On the next slide, it mentions utilization management rules, which I suspect you guys are familiar with. These are things like quantity limits or prior authorization or step therapy. These can all limit your ability to get your drugs. These are often used when there's a safety concern with the medication, like a drug interaction or to ensure that a drug is used for its indicated purpose, and then also to control costs. On the next slide is where we're going to start looking at the best way to get an estimate of your costs based on the medications that you use. So you want to go to Medicare.gov and use their plan finder. We'll give you a heads up this weekend. They're going to be making some updates and maintenance to the website. So wait until Monday to try this. So basically, you go to the website, you click this green tab that I've got circled in red there that says Find Health and Drug Plans, and then on the next slide, you choose whether to enter a general or a personalized search. I always recommend using the personalized search because it will automatically apply any discounts that you might get if you qualify for extra help, and it'll show you the cost for your current plan if you're not familiar with that yet. On the next slide, you can see at the top right there's a red circle that's showing the person's current plan as well as whether they get any extra help. And again, that's why I'm encouraging you to use this personalized search feature. Also on this view, you enter the drugs you take. You just start typing in the name of your drug in the box in the middle of the screen, and then you click Find My Drug just to the right. When you do that, you'll get a pop-up that you can see on the next slide. So the pop-up will allow you to select the dosage of the drug that you take, the quantity you receive, and how often you fill it, and which type of pharmacy you use. So I'm going to give you a couple of tips here. First, set the frequency as a 1-month supply, regardless of whether you get it in like a 60 or 90-day supply. And second, keep the pharmacy listed as retail pharmacy, because not doing those two things is going to kind of mess up the estimates that you see at the end. So be sure you do that. On the next slide, you can see that we've entered a drug and we've been assigned this drug ID list, which is in a big red circle. So be sure that you write down this drug list ID number as well as your password date, because once you've created your list of medications, you can just enter these instead of going through this part of the process again. On the next slide, you have an opportunity to select a pharmacy. You can pick 2 at a time. If you don't see your pharmacy on this initial list, use the drop-down box to increase the radius of miles. So on the next slide, for this particular example, I picked 2 pharmacies, one that I thought was an independent pharmacy, and then Walmart. I picked them because the independent pharmacy listed on the next slide, Oxnard, is not likely to be one of the preferred cost-sharing pharmacies, but Walmart usually is. So on the current slide, you can see there's a big red X. Don't do anything with the stuff under this red X, because that's going to limit the options you see, and we want to see as many choices as possible. For simplicity's sake today, I'm just going to select Part D drug plans, which you see listed there as prescription drug plans. So I just select the checkbox and then click Continue to Plan Results. I'll then see a screen that looks like the next slide. So this slide is telling me that there are 25 drug plans available to this person in this zip code. You can pick up to 3 to compare at a time. I picked the first 2 and then clicked on Compare Plans at the top and got the view on the next slide. So I'm comparing a Symphonic plan and a Humana Walmart plan. And you can see the fixed cost. So oftentimes people pick a plan based on these fixed costs, but don't do this. These don't include the cost of your medications. I mean, they're important costs, but they don't really give you the whole picture. So what you really want to do is when you're on the website, you scroll down the page, but in our presentation, we're going to go to the next slide, and you'll see that the price tag, which is the estimated annual cost, is really what we want to look at. You can see on the next slide there's not a great difference in the cost between these 2 drugs and these 2 plans. It's around $7,000 for the full year cost, which includes the premium and the deductible and what you pay for your medication. Remember, I only entered 1 drug, so this is a really simplified example. You'd expect that the prices would vary more if you had multiple medications. So it's important to remember also that this is an estimate. And so if you're prescribed new drugs throughout the year, or the cost of your medication fluctuates, then your costs are going to change as well. So if we can go to slide 63, there we go. This view shows how much you'd expect to pay each month. It's like a monthly summary that includes the premium, the deductible, and the medicine. In the red box I've added at the top, you can see that the Medicare Beneficiary, oh, I'm sorry, go, oh, I'm afraid my screen is looking different. So the red box at the top shows where the Medicare Beneficiary goes into and comes out of the donut hole. This happens in January because the price tag for Gleevec is so high. If you'd like to see more detail about the cost of each of the medications versus the monthly summary, just click where the arrow is pointing that says View Monthly Drug Costs and Details, and you'll see it'll open a new window, which is on the next slide, that shows the cost for each drug. Note you can also at the top change the pharmacy type to see the costs for the different pharmacies. And then finally, you want to be sure on the next slide to check for the utilization management rules or restrictions in the pharmacy. So it's really critical to scroll down. When you're on the site, you scroll down the page to see where the drug is placed on the tier and whether there are restrictions. So in this case, on both of these plans, there's a prior authorization requirement. On the next slide, I wanted to just show you guys how much a person with extra help could save. This is a demonstration for a person that has just a 25% subsidy. I selected the same two plans for review, and the deductible amount was cut from $360 to $74. The premium for Symphonics is about $7 less, and the Humana Walmart premium is about $2 less. On the next slide, you can see where you get the real savings. The extra help savings is pretty significant. Without extra help, the beneficiary pays about $7,000 a year versus the person with extra help paying about $1,400. On the next slide, you can see information about rights and protections. So if your drug isn't covered, what can you do? You can check for utilization management rules. You can request a coverage determination and an exception. If those don't work, you always have the opportunity to appeal. On the next slide, there's a list of resources that you can access to get more information, particularly the last bullet point, which is a group of Medicare counselors who offer free and unbiased help. So be sure to find your local office if you would like assistance with this. The next two slides include links to tools that NCUA created. This benefits checkup screens for public and private benefits and allows you to apply for extra help. The next one, called Economic Checkup, helps with budgeting, reducing debt, and so I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys today, and I'll turn it back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks for the presentation. If anybody has any questions, you can see Melissa's email on the screen right now, and we can always provide it to you after the presentation. I'd like to now take questions. Michelle, as a patient treating or taking Gleevec, can I refuse to take the generic brand now available and stay with Gleevec? Can the doctor's insurance or pharmacy refuse to prescribe or dispense or pay for Gleevec and force you to take the generic brand?
To answer the first question, yes, the patients have the right to refuse the dispensing of the generic drug if they prefer to stay on the brand name drug. Your doctor can write a prescription specifying to dispense as written, or you may have seen this before, DAW. Your pharmacist will then dispense you the brand name drug. Some insurance will still cover you for the brand name drug, but others may not. If your insurance refuses to cover the brand name drug, you will have to call your insurance to remind them that the generic version is not indicated for GIST at this time. You can also provide them with the generic product insert as a documentation alongside a note from your doctor about your disease.
Thank you, Michelle. I have another question for you as well. CML patients are reporting their insurance companies are rejecting Gleevec prescriptions with a DAW order and telling them they must get the generic. Can you discuss patient rights and actions that they can take themselves to follow up if they want to stay on the branded drug?
The DAW actually differs from state to state. Some pharmacists in some states are allowed to, meaning that they can respect the dispense as written, or they may not. In other states, they are mandatorily required to substitute a generic version of the prescribed drug if all prescription requirements are met. Patients, I think at the end of the day, should consider their out-of-pocket cost. If that consideration permits you to stay on the branded drug, then you can work with your doctor to help you appeal to your insurance company to cover the brand name drug based on the fact that the generic version is not indicated for GIST. And if you are a CML patient, same thing. You can appeal to your insurance many times. And one good tip is to speak to the higher-ups of the insurance company, because sometimes the help desk will not be able to answer your questions, or they cannot make those decisions at that time. So you can also find a different specialty pharmacy who will abide with the DAW.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, so we've really run out of time. I just want to see maybe if Dr. Trent can answer this question real quick before we wrap up. Dr. Trent, are studies currently being done to determine generic imatinib's effectiveness for GIST patients? If so, when will results be available?
I'm not aware of any prospective studies comparing the two agents side by side. There is some discussion about measuring plasma levels in patients on generic imatinib, which has been done in the past and can be done just to determine whether the level is being maintained. I don't think that that's gonna be the issue. I don't expect that to be an issue, but that's the kind of work that people are going to be doing, and also evaluating response rates. But I think all of this is going to be done retrospectively, like the two studies I presented for CML. I really don't think there's going to be prospective comparative studies.
Okay. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we did not have time to get to all the questions today, but I do want to say that the LifeRaf group will continue to provide information and education about this topic to the patient community, as well as collaborate with our friends at the CML community to help get the answers out to many of the patients' questions and concerns. So I appreciate everybody's participation today. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to everybody for participating.